BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I will be joined later in the program by Mark Hewitt. He is the author of the Zodiac Serial Killer Trilogy, as well as the book Obsessed, My Relentless Pursuit of the Zodiac Killer. And I will also be discussing the possible influences from the Vietnam era on the Zodiac Killer's persona, and our Zodiac Monday movie for the week will be Mr. Sardonicus. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. So I have a statement for you and a challenge question before we truly begin today's episode. And just for fun, we're going to do the declarative statement first. I mean, why not? Now, some of you will remember that I've been discussing several AI-generated videos about the Zodiac Killer, and by discussing them, I mean combating them, because let's not kid ourselves, there is a lot of AI slop out there. Last year on the channel, I also featured a clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson on his program Star Talk, where he was talking about evidence-based findings and having a respect for the truth. And just by chance, I was scrolling through Reels on either Facebook or YouTube, and I came across a different video from Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was talking about the rise of AI and combating AI slop. And here's the challenge statement for you. He made the prediction that by the year 2028, that the internet would become unreliable. That there's some people out there who believe in fake news, like a fake news story gets generated and shared and lots of people believe it. But as we're slowly starting to see, many people are recognizing that certain things are AI generated and they are just filled with errors and pieces of misinformation. We've talked about a lot of them here on Zodiac Monday. So what Neil deGrasse Tyson's point is that if we're going to live in this world where AI content can create videos about true crime cases or about news stories or about topics that are related to conspiracy theories, we might get to a point where nobody trusts the internet anymore. And in that video clip, he did say that the internet was going to die. And I was like, well, I certainly don't think the internet is going to die by 2028. But what he meant was it's going to die in terms of reliability. And then in 3 years, it's 2025 at the time of this recording, in 3 years, it's just going to go back to looking at cat videos and pretty pictures, and that's all the internet's going to be used for, because AI will make internet content so unreliable that people are just going to use it purely for entertainment. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Now, I told you guys that I also had a Zodiac Killer challenge question for you, and this one I think is a little bit more interesting to explore for Zodiac Monday. And the challenge question is, what is one thing about the Zodiac Killer mystery that you absolutely believe is true? And the reason why I'm asking this is, I heard the question actually on the Ripper Cast, a program that is about Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. And they asked this to a Ripperologist named Paul Begg, and I was discussing it on Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper. But I would like to rephrase it for the Zodiac Killer. They asked him, what is one thing about Jack the Ripper that you absolutely believe is true? Well, what is one thing about the Zodiac Killer that you absolutely believe is true? And I think it's a good question because there are lots of things that I can tell you that I think are true, but like that I absolutely would accept, even like if I were faced with contradictory evidence and I would say, no, that evidence is wrong. This is what really happened. I mean, I believe that there was a single killer who committed the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the Stein murder. I do not believe the Zodiac Killer committed any crimes outside of that time frame, December 20th of 1968 to October 11th of 1969. I mean, I believe there was one letter writer from July 31st of 1969 to March of 1971. Yes, there were copycats and hoaxers, but I believe there was a single person acting as the Zodiac Killer, writing letters during that period. There was a hiatus from 72, 73, but in 1974 the Zodiac wrote the Exorcist letter. I believe the final confirmed letters were in 1974. Okay, I think that stuff is true. I believe that, but do I absolutely believe it? I could be easily persuaded to the contrary. So I'm going to ask the question to you one more time. What is one thing about the Zodiac Killer mystery that you absolutely believe is true, that you wouldn't back down from? Like, something for me might be like, well, let's say, for example, they would say that, oh no, the murder of Paul Stine didn't occur at Washington and Cherry in Presidio Heights. It actually occurred at Washington and Maple. Yeah, I know, and I know it says it in his logbook. That's one piece of evidence. Oh, and here's a report that says that the murder of Paul Stine actually occurred at Washington and Maple and not Washington and Cherry. All right, that's something that I would not back down from. I would say, nope, it was at Washington and Cherry. How on earth would you explain the Robbins kids as eyewitnesses, the witnesses who provided the details for the famous composite sketch, if it were at Washington and Maple? That's just an example, and it's not a realistic example. But that is something that I do accept wholeheartedly. So, what is your answer? And some people might have suspects. Some people might have a certain belief about the letters. Do you think that there is a strong indicator about anything that is certifiable, verifiable, and something that cannot be disputed in your own mind? I would love to know your responses. Please put them in the comments section down below. And I would actually like to look at a comment that was left on last week's episode, and this one comes to us from Kid Freshie. And Kid Freshie says, Ned, can you do a show focusing on the Vietnam War hippie culture angle? There must be lots of theories pointing to the Zodiac Killer as a traumatized veteran, or that at least he was involved in the political and cultural environment that permeated the area in which the Zodiac operated. There's one documentary, I think from David Hoffman, about the late 1960s San Francisco, that interviews a vet-turned police officer who talks about the Presidio police and the types of crime happening in that area at the time. Really gives context and insight into the Stine crime. So I was watching the David Hoffman videos, and it features an interview with the officer in question. The one that was requested was a response to the David Bowman interviews. David Hoffman's the filmmaker, David Bowman is the officer. And yes, he tells the story of being a Vietnam veteran and the atrocities that he saw in Vietnam. But when he came back to the United States, he became a police officer, and he's working patrolling Golden Gate Park, and he talks about the threats and the trees, and he has to be on the lookout, always aware of his surroundings, and it's almost like being back in Vietnam. And then he also tells the story of working with the Park Station, and Park Station was the site of a bombing in 1970 that was referenced by the Zodiac Killer, and it saw the death of Officer Brian McDonnell. And I'm actually going to play the clip from David Bowman, and he can explain in his own words, and then let's have a response.
I went into the police department in 1969, and in February of 1970, I was assigned to Park Police Station in San Francisco, which was the station charged with patrolling the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. The radical underground was in full swing and had been for several years, and a few months prior, the Ingleside Police Station had been bombed by a pipe bomb. Several officers were killed. We had officers being assassinated, shot on the street for no reason. There was not a crime taking place. We were being sought out and shot indiscriminately. So the stations erected these enormous fences, chain link fences around them, about 10, 12, 15 foot tall, and installed lights facing outward. And it became another hilltop base camp. And I found myself working the midnight shift, and I would arrive at midnight, and I was given an M16 rifle. And I walked outside the police station, just outside the lights, outside of the fence, and I would patrol because the station was inside of Golden Gate Park. We were surrounded by trees and undergrowth, and there I was, back in Vietnam, protecting a base camp.
It seems crazy.
We were at war.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think it helped me, because you have to remember that a lot of the combat infantrymen who returned from Vietnam returned from massive assaults to your being, your psyche, and then cut off and sent back into a world in which they had no control. Imagine living around 100 people continuously in a high-stress situation where you are surrounded by fear, unknown, darkness, and there are people out there who desperately want to kill you. And imagine all of a sudden a shot rings out or an explosion takes place, and friends of yours are now on the ground screaming, a leg is gone or they're shot. A helicopter comes and takes them away, and you never know what happened to them. You had no way to find out if they lived or died, where they were from, or anything. Years later, as you thought back on the war, as you relived that particular incident when your friend was wounded, you were frustrated because you never were able to find out what happened to him. This person literally disappeared in your life. Station, I remember standing outside, and a couple drove up in a huge school bus. At that time, the city was loaded with Volkswagen vans and school buses, and they lived in a school bus, and they carried this bundled package into Park Police Station. I was in front. I walked in with them into the station. They opened up the bundled package, and it was a dead baby.
And once again, those were the words of Officer David Bowman, and this is available on the channel David Hoffman. It's part of his Ordinary People series. And one thing that David Hoffman says at the beginning of these interviews is he wanted to tell the story of the 1960s, and he really wanted to capture the viewpoints from people who were just ordinary workers, ordinary police officers, as opposed to high-profile members of the counterculture, as well as established writers and musicians. He wanted to talk to citizens who are living in these situations. Now, Kid Freshie had a point, and what I was asked was, has this theory been talked about? Yes, absolutely. This theory about the Zodiac Killer being a traumatized veteran has been discussed, but it has not been discussed enough. No, I do genuinely think that. I mean, so many people were in the Vietnam War. So many people were involved in those conflicts, and there were so many veterans coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think the type of reasoning that we can get is when you listen to David Bowman telling the story, he's like, he went to war, and he saw these terrible things, and then he came back to the United States, and it's right in his own backyard. It's right on his beat. He has to deal with very similar problems. And another point that he really wanted to reinforce was that in that clip that you just heard, it's not just because people were dressing differently or that some guys had long hair or people wanted to have certain fashion choices. It's because there were actually chaotic elements and unsanitary elements, and more importantly, maybe most importantly, inhumane elements. Now, when he told the story of the baby who was brought to the Park Station, I thought he was going to say that this was involved with the Park Station bombing. But as you heard very clearly, some people brought a dead baby in there because they just didn't want to deal with the remains, and they didn't seem to show any regard for human life. So somebody in that situation, let's say, hypothetically, if the Zodiac Killer were a Vietnam veteran, he goes to Vietnam at some time between 1957 and 1968, and then he's like, back in America, all right, I'm back in my home country, and he's seeing all of these problems that reminded him of Vietnam, and this creates the grudge. I mean, in all of the recent discussions on criminal psychology that I've been having here on this channel, that is one of the things that we come back to over and over again. It appears that the Zodiac Killer had a particular type of grudge against someone or something. Could it just be young people? Could it just be the counterculture? Could it just be that he was upset with the way that people were living. I spent years in the jungle trying to fight for the United States of America, and people are just abusing the system. You know what? Or, like, better than abusing the system, how about just showing disrespect to all things American? And so what is he going to do? He's going to develop a type of revenge plan. And he's going to do this in a very covert way. He's not just going to go to Haight-Ashbury and start killing hippies. That would get him caught. If he were to do this in a way that would just terrorize the San Francisco Bay Area, then he would be able to spread his message to a larger number of people and not get caught. And as terrible as the Zodiac was, if that were his plan, it seems that it would have worked, because the Zodiac has not been captured to this day. Now, I would like to shift gears and talk about something else on the Zodiac Killer News Report. Some of you might believe that I am somewhat open-minded when it comes to looking at different types of Zodiac Killer ideas. But somebody posted this in a Facebook group, and they're saying that it's a series of 7 different patterns that can be found in the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher. And the patterns involve different shapes that can be found, almost as if somebody has hidden an underlying meaning in the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher, the second confirmed cipher. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I hope you will come over to the YouTube version so you can see the images. And there are 2 parallelograms that are featured, and they are created by joining the zodiac symbols with the dot or periods. Now, I have some real problems with this. I told you guys I'm open-minded, but this is something that I would genuinely dispute. I know that people like to make connections. I know that this is part of a larger process, and there are going to be 6 other patterns of shapes that can be found. What do they mean? It's not completely clear as of now, but I would even dispute this from the very beginning and almost just call for a halt to this type of thinking, because I'm not even seeing the pattern in these parallelogram shapes, and I'm not trying to dispute this purely to knock somebody's research. I'm genuinely stating that I don't see where it's coming from. And for example, we have 2 zodiac symbols on the small one on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side are 2 dots and periods. But in the larger parallelogram, the zodiac signs are not on the same side, and the dots are not on the same side. You have 1 zodiac sign and a dot on the left, and 1 zodiac sign and a dot on the right. So it's not even following the pattern and design of a single metric. And this is just a clear example, in my possible opinion. Again, if I'm faced with contradictory evidence, I will accept it. But this is just an example of looking at different possibilities, drawing your own lines on the paper and saying, hey, look at what I discovered. Well, of course they're going to be repeating symbols in the 340 cipher. It was an English language cipher. The solution was in English. And when you're writing out a 340 character chunk of the English language, you're going to have certain letters that are going to repeat. And the Zodiac used repetitive symbols in the 340. So drawing 2 parallelograms and acting like it's part of some larger coded message, you might have a point if it followed the pattern. But as you can see very clearly, the 2 zodiac signs for the small one are on one side and the 2 dots are on the other side. With the larger one, it doesn't follow that pattern. So I guess I'm just trying to be a little bit clearer about some things where I can see where some people are coming from. Even if I don't agree with their conclusion, I can understand their reasoning. But this would be an example of where I don't see where the person is coming from. I don't understand the reasoning. I know what they're trying to do, but I don't know that they are doing this in any type of justifiable way. What do you think about the parallelograms? And if you want to dispute that, you can put your response in the comment section down below. I would love to read them. And one more time, you can always hit the like button and subscribe. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 says, have a productive week as always. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter. And River Prawn Pottery has a message on this one, and the message is that I need to look at a specific episode of the Consult podcast. Last week on the channel, I was talking about the Consult podcast and their psychological profile of the Zodiac Killer, but the specific one that River Prawn Pottery recommended was episode number 92, and starting at the 25-minute mark, the Consult podcast was talking about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, as well as the Zodiac Killer, and I will respond to them in just a moment, but first I would like to give a shout out to CZ Guy. CZ Guy, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support as well, and you three have been absolutely amazing. Batman66, River Prawn Pottery, and CZ Guy. It wouldn't be the same without you. And now we also have another supporter on buymeacoffee.com, and this one is going to come to us from Flora. Flora has also shared one on the Super Thanks via the Super Thanks here on YouTube, and that it seems like Flora has become a fan of the Black Dahlia series and a close follower of that one. On Thursdays, I talk about the Black Dahlia murder, the murder of Elizabeth Short from 1947, Dahlia Thursday here on Black Box Online Radio, and Flora has been very engaged in the discussions in the comment section down below, and Flora has a message on buymeacoffee.com simply saying, "Have an amazing week, Ned." And to you guys, all the listeners and followers of Black Box Online Radio, you guys have an amazing week as well. And Flora, thank you so much for your support on buymeacoffee.com. Now, I told you guys that I was going to discuss the Consult podcast, episode number 92, where it discussed first the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, and really the person who was being interviewed was the host of the Murder Bookshelf Book Club, which is a podcast that focuses on true crime books. So I'm absolutely curious what she had to say, and what she was saying is with the JonBenet Ramsey case, she recommended the book by Paula Woodward, which more or less supports the intruder theory, something that you guys know I'm curious about. And for a while on the Tuesday show, I was talking about the case of JonBenet Ramsey, and now I talk about Madeleine McCann, but I'm very, very eager to get back to the JonBenet case in the future because I really feel that that series was unfinished. I finally got deep into the JonBenet mystery, not just making superficial assessment videos, but I really got under the surface and explored a lot of the more intense content, so I would love to get back to the JonBenet series in the near future. Please look out for that here on Black Box Online Radio. But on the Consult podcast, I think the things that I was meant to pay attention to were two bold claims from the Murder Bookshelf, and that is that, number one, when the Zodiac Killer would write his letters, he would often include misspellings and just very odd combinations of letters. And no, I don't think they're going to turn into parallelograms. Sorry if I'm just being a little bit too downtrodden, but I don't think so. And what the host of the Murder Bookshelf was proposing was that she did not believe that the misspellings were intentional, and she was totally going with the mild dyslexia angle. But to be clear, and not to put words in her mouth, she was saying that she thought the Zodiac Killer had either dyslexia or a type of learning disability, and that the origin of the symbols and the misspellings and the reasons why he's spelling Christmas with two S's at the end is because when he was younger, he probably made up his own methods to write because he had trouble spelling. Christmas sounds like Christ and Mass put together, Christ Mass. Even though that's an incorrect spelling, it was something perhaps that he kept in his mind about how he would write out the word because he didn't know how to spell. Things that would be very easy to spell were very difficult for him, and he was probably ridiculed a lot, berated a lot, and insulted a lot for this by his parents because she believed, the host of the Murder Bookshelf, that the Zodiac Killer, in his mind as a kid, was like, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to read, I'm trying to write. I'm not trying to misspell things on purpose. It's actually hard, or I don't understand it, or it just doesn't come naturally to me. And maybe he came up with some of his own ways to remember things like Christmas, Christ, and Mass put together, and then those things just stuck and they carried on into adulthood, and he misspelled them. Another clear example of this would be Paradise, Paradice, and paradise is almost always, I think it's always spelled that way by the Zodiac Killer. Would this be the same way? This is just how he remembered it as a kid because he had dyslexia or a learning disability and he couldn't spell properly? Because she was of a similar mindset compared to the other hosts of the Console podcast, that the Zodiac Killer was so narcissistic that he wouldn't want misspellings out there intentionally. He wanted people to think he was smart, and childish misspellings, like misspelling paradise and Christmas, that would make him look stupid. Now, she's not the first person to talk about mild dyslexia. The first person that I heard talk about this was Soren Korsgaard in his book, America's Jack the Ripper, The Crimes and Psychology of the Zodiac Killer. Then the second edition was called The Definitive Account of the Zodiac Killer. But Soren Korsgaard made a very clear case for this in his book. Maybe someone has talked about it before him. But in terms of the dyslexia angle, I saw everything that she was saying. I saw where she was coming from. All right, he couldn't spell the word Christmas correctly when he was a kid, so he had this little way of remembering it. But that was an incorrect way. You think he would still use the correct version if he were into adulthood. And the second problem that I have is, I don't think this accounts for one particular variable, and that is dopamine-centered personalities. I talk about it all the time on Black Box Online Radio. I'm a dopamine-centered personality, where sometimes people will misspell things because they think it's funny, they think it's silly, or it's not even, those words are too complex. There's a dopamine surge that comes from unconventional behavior. And yes, misspelling words can be a form of unconventional behavior. I've also said in the past, I misspelled words for comedic effect. Arthur Lee Allen misspelled words for comedic effect. Maybe Richard Gaikowski did it too. Guy did intentionally misspell words, to the best of our knowledge. So that just seems like people are doing this because it is stimulating to them. And it almost has like, you could call it a personal meaning, but I really just think that's even too complex of a description. It's something to the effect of, it is just somewhat exhilarating to misspell things or to do anything in an unconventional way. It makes someone excitable. Let me know what you think about that. And the second point that was discussed on the Console podcast, episode 92, is one that I haven't really explored before, and it relates to the Zodiac Killer's hooded costume. Again, their guest, who was the host of the Murder Bookshelf, really only brought up 2 points about the Zodiac, and one of her original observations was, on September 27th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. He was wearing his hooded costume, he carried the gun, the knife, the pre-cut lengths of rope, and the hooded costume was extremely elaborate. And what she began to notice is that this doesn't seem like something that he would have had somebody create for him. It doesn't seem like something that he would have gone to a seamstress or a tailor or a friend and say, hey, can you sew together this black executioner's hood for me? No. She believed that most likely the Zodiac sewed together his own costume. And that would mean that, number one, the Zodiac knew how to sew. And she said in the older times that it was not normal for men to learn how to sew. Maybe he was heavily ridiculed for that as well, because it's a feminine activity. And that he couldn't spell, but he could sew. So he wanted to do that because he knew that he was good at it. He knew he could make an amazing costume, but it's also not something that he would have told a lot of people about, so they wouldn't have known about his sewing abilities. But what she proposed was, why didn't the police go to fabric stores and retail shops and just ask, did a man matching the Zodiac Killer's description buy a large amount of fabric? Now, my immediate response is, well, I don't know if they didn't do that. I'm really not sure if they actually conducted those types of investigations. Point number 2. This is some genuine points of contention. How do we know that the Zodiac Killer was the one who sewed together his own costume? How do we know that he did that? I believe that the killer put the cross circle on there by himself. I do accept that. Yes, I think he knew how to sew, but lots of people who learned how to do that in the older days. Don Chaney even remarked about this during his interview with Tom Voigt. Didn't everybody know how to sew back then? People in the military would sew things on their own uniforms, right? And also, I mean, one point that I do genuinely argue is that I believe the hood already existed. I do not think that the Zodiac walked into a store and was like, hey, where's the black fabric? Okay, I'm going to use this one. All right, I'm going to buy all this black fabric and just bring it back to his home and work with the sewing machine and stitch it all together. I don't think that's what happened. I mean, maybe if your suspect is Donald Dickel, that would be reasonable. He owned a sewing machine shop and he probably knew how to sew very well. Probably, possibly, I never really looked at any of his work in that regard. But I believe the hood already existed. Maybe it was a prop from a theatrical play. Maybe it was something that was used for a different purpose. Maybe it was like a liner to another type of equipment, which I don't necessarily believe that one. More or less that it was a costume or a prop, and then the Zodiac modified it to make it more elaborate. But in defense of the host of the murder bookshelf, she was saying that she thought both of the victims were meant to die. She was like, the Zodiac may have created this because he knew that he had the ability to create an elaborate costume, but not a lot of people did. Not a lot of people knew that he could do something like that. So he wanted to murder the victims, and he did not want them to tell the story of the elaborate costume. She might be the first person that I've heard say it like that the Zodiac intentionally wanted to hide his elaborate costumes, that he wanted Brian and Cecilia to die so they wouldn't tell the story because his costume-making abilities were all a secret. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments section down below. I would love to read your responses. And one more time, that was from the Console Podcast, episode number 92. And thanks again to River Prawn Pottery. Now, moving on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, I told you guys that I've been reading the book Zodiac Lives by Rhoda Torre. And it tells the story of a possibly fictitious Zodiac Killer victim named Lorraine Rehawk. And a woman has a daughter who is possibly possessed by the spirit of Lorraine Rehawk, even to the point where she will answer and behave like Lorraine and not the daughter's real name, which is Jennifer. But in the section that I was just reading, they were talking about how they want to actually find out what's going on, and in their investigations into her medical issue, they're trying to learn more about the Zodiac Killer, because she's talking about being a Zodiac Killer victim, very specific things. You weren't with me in the Presidio, you weren't with me when the Zodiac got me. And they're like, what on earth is going on? Again, Zodiac Lives, it's a novel. So they contact a Zodiac Killer sleuth. And they're trying to find out what's happening. And he learns about the murder of Lorraine Rehawk, most likely a fictitious story. I couldn't find anything to support it. But Lorraine worked at the Golden Gate Cafe, and she was attacked and murdered by someone, and her body was taken to a dump site. And the murder occurred in 1978. And the Zodiac sleuth they contact said, whoa, nope, this was not the Zodiac Killer. Outside of the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror or years of operation, the Zodiac transported the victim's body, and the Zodiac of 1968 and 69 did not transport the victim's bodies, and just giving a bunch of reasons why he thought that there's no truth to this story, because, number one, he didn't even think that this victim, Lorraine Rehawk, was killed by the Zodiac Killer. And I was just thinking, wow, is this fictitious Zodiac sleuth in the book Zodiac Lives, like, is this a fictitious sleuth, or is this me a year ago? Because I would have said all of those things. A 1978 murder where somebody working in a restaurant is abducted and murdered, I would be like, no, I don't really think that's the Zodiac Killer. I mean, it's outside of the Zodiac's reign of terror, and the Zodiac didn't transport the bodies of the victims. And it's so odd when you're reading something like that, because you can often have these moments where you're just thinking, well, now, wait a second. I know that I've defended all of those points in the past, but let's look at the objections. The Zodiac starts out committing murders. Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs. He doesn't really make physical contact with the victims. At Lake Berryessa, he makes physical contact with Brian and Cecilia. He ties them up. Then, with the murder of Paul Stine, he shoots him in the side of the head, and he handles Paul Stine's body in the taxi, taking his wallet, keys, and cutting off a piece of his bloody shirt. Then, what if the Zodiac Killer kept on killing? And you might be like, Ned, haven't you said so many things against this? Didn't you start out the episode by saying, well, one thing that I believe is true is the Zodiac didn't commit murders after October 11th of 1969. Yes, just a hypothetical. And after the murder of Paul Stine, he graduates to making even more intense contact with the victims. The Kathleen Johns incident, March 22nd, 1970, lets her in the car, and he is driving her around. The murder of Donna Lass, September 6, 1970, or at least the abduction and murder, and he's actually successful that time. So you could see how the Zodiac could be growing in not only confidence, but also in his ability to make up-close and confrontational attacks on the victims. And most likely, this is a purely fictitious story. Yes, it's advertised as a novel by Rhoda Dottore, but it's still very thought-provoking all the same. One more time, the book is called Zodiac Lives. But really, if I could just ask you guys what you think about, what do you think about that? Do you think the Zodiac Killer stopped killing after the murder of Paul Stine? Or do you think it's what I said in the hypothetical, I repeat, hypothetical, that he wanted to slowly get warmer when it came to attacking the victims? At first, he's going to shoot them and walk away. Then he's going to tie them up. Then he's going to touch a dead body. Then he's going to touch a living person. Then he's actually going to murder and abduct a living person successfully, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. Which one do you agree with? Put your idea in the comment section down below. And I also want to let you guys know that in 2023 on Zodiac Monday, I started something called the movie segment. That's really just what it was. I would often conclude the episode by discussing a movie, but somebody gave me the name Zodiac Monday Movie, and that's what I've been doing over the last few weeks here on Black Box Online Radio. And this week's Zodiac Monday movie is Mr. Sardonicus. It is a film from 1961, and it was proposed by Skating Crow Productions as being a possible influence on the Zodiac Killer. And I learned about this movie, goodness, probably also in 2023, and then I sat on the information, did nothing. In 2024, I discussed the movie poster here on Black Box Online Radio during my Halloween episode, and I was like, oh yeah, this channel, Skating Crow Productions, is talking about Mr. Sardonicus and the influences on the Zodiac Killer, and it is now September of 2025. I finally got around to watching this one, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, this is one that I've waited to see for quite some time. Now, the biggest thing that Skating Crow Productions was arguing was that the face of Mr. Sardonicus was an inspiration for the Zodiac's design and or choosing the Halloween card. The skeleton with a big mouth on the Halloween card as opposed to the second skeleton, but the one that has the larger grinning mouth is a direct connection and reference to the movie Mr. Sardonicus. And if you do watch the movie Mr. Sardonicus, I could see a few things about why the Zodiac Killer would like that film. I absolutely cannot confirm that that skeleton was chosen and or designed or modified in some way as a direct connection to the film. I don't think there's enough information for that. But yes, there are smiling skeletons and corpses in Mr. Sardonicus, I'll give you that. And if you do watch the movie, Mr. Sardonicus actually goes by the name Baron Sardonicus in the film. And it tells the story of a man whose father bought a winning lottery ticket. But on the night that he bought the winning lottery ticket, his father died, so they buried him in a cemetery. But then, once they realized that he had the winning lottery ticket and he had the right number, then, Sardonicus has to dig up his father. He has a different name at the time. And he digs up his father's grave and he opens the casket. And then he's just so horrified by the sight of his father's dead body that he takes the ticket, but then he's left with that disfigured face. And throughout the movie, there's some explanations why. Is this black magic? Is this something else? I do not like to give away spoilers, but possible Zodiac influences and reasons why the Zodiac may have used this as an inspiration. Number one, the scenery. There are things that are reminiscent of the tree and the eyes on the Halloween card. Furthermore, there's even a character from Mr. Sardonicus that was blinded in one eye. And that's very, very essential to the story. But really, the dead trees are what stood out to me at the beginning. Mr. Sardonicus, again using the name Baron in the movie, also has a garden that only grows terrible plants. There are no flowers in his garden, and he's like, this is my garden of terrible things, hemlock and wolf's bane. He listed off a bunch of other unpleasant thing. Even weeds, they grow in the garden. So there are lots of things in this movie that are just tying into the overall unpleasantness and maybe the horror elements of the Halloween card. But the things that might actually be relevant to the Zodiac and his persona would be that Mr. Sardonicus is extremely dominant. He controls women. He talks about betrayals, tying all into the grudge, all into people who go against his ways. And really, I think that I'm trying to say this without giving away spoilers because there's something that's very essential to the storyline. But a lot of the movie is him trying to escape his disfigured look, and he goes through several different methods of doing that. And that stuff wasn't necessarily Zodiac related, so I think out of the films that I've watched recently, I absolutely think that there is some value in the film Shockproof from 1949, The Sniper from 1952, and even While the City Sleeps from 1956, if I recall. But with Mr. Sardonicus, again from 1961, I was told to pay attention to the Halloween card, and I do see it. I see all of the symbolism, but a big issue that I have is the reasons why this film may have been an inspiration for the Halloween card are very basic, very general. Could there not be another reason why the skeleton has the wide smile, or why there are floating eyes on the Halloween card? Could that not just be that someone wanted to do it just to be horrific, and they weren't actually thinking about the Sardonicus movie? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And Mr. Sardonicus is available for free online. You can watch it on YouTube for free. Very, very entertaining movie, even if I wasn't completely convinced of the Zodiac inspirations. And right now, I'm going to welcome Mark Hewitt to the program. He will join us on Zodiac Monday, and he will be talking to us not only about his books, but also about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. So without further ado, let's bring Mark on the air. And in this episode, I will be joined by Mark Hewitt. He is the author of the books Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed, the Zodiac Serial Killer Trilogy. And last year, he also released a book called Obsessed, My Relentless Pursuit of the Zodiac Killer. And Mark is going to be talking to us all about the Zodiac, as well as the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and the connections that could exist between the two stories. Mark, are you with me?
I am. Thank you for having me here today, Ned. Appreciate it.
Yes, and welcome back to Black Box Online Radio. It's been a while, right?
Yeah, a year or so. I think you've interviewed me, this is like the fourth or fifth time?
Yes, that's correct.
I always enjoy talking to you. You ask very good questions.
Well, I appreciate that, Mark. So just in case somebody is listening to this and they aren't familiar with your books or they haven't heard you on a different podcast, would you like to tell the story of how you first became familiar with the Zodiac?
Sure. Boy, it's a long road. That's actually the topic of my fourth Zodiac book, Obsessed. That I published last September, and it's my tale of getting interested in the Zodiac case and how I went down not only a single rabbit hole, but a series of rabbit holes and became completely consumed by the case. So Obsessed talks about my fascination with the case and my getting into all kinds of different situations where, as part of my research, I probably read close to 1,000 books in all in my research. One of the most surreal experiences I had in researching the Zodiac case is just prior to getting involved in it and taking a deep dive into it, I wrote a letter to Charles Manson. And one of the most surreal experiences I ever had in my entire life. And I have been married and I have become a father. But reaching into my mailbox and pulling out a letter and seeing Charles Manson's insane handwriting and realizing that he had written me a letter, that's got to be it. That was an incredible experience and something that I think if you've never been through it, you probably can't understand it. But anyways, so that's Obsessed. Obsessed is my story. It's a memoir of a zodiologist, I guess I would call myself. But prior to that, I released in 2016, 2017, and 2018, the 3 books that comprise my Zodiac Serial Killer series. It's a trilogy. The first book, Hunted, the Zodiac Murders, tells the story of the Zodiac in great depth. It has been acknowledged by many people as being the most accurate and the most in-depth recounting of the tale. And in that book, I don't try to solve the case. I don't try to resolve anything. I simply tell the story, including various perspectives, because different people have different perspectives, even on what happened, such as at the Paul Stein murder scene. Different police officers reported different things happening. I don't try to resolve that in Hunted. I simply stated different sides of the case and let the reader decide for themselves what they think actually happened. The reason it is so accurate is because in each of my editions, I have included the request, if anybody finds a factual error, to please let me know or let my publisher know. And we are now in the 3rd edition of the book, and a number of people have written and said, "Oh, you got this name wrong," or "You spelled this incorrectly." Nothing that materially changes the details of the case. Nothing that changes the story of the case. It's more minor details. So I put out a 2nd edition with the revisions from people who had responded, and then even with the 2nd edition, someone came along and said, "Well, Mount Diablo is not in Alameda County." And I said, "Really?" So I looked it up, and sure enough, I had that wrong. So between that and the cracking of the Z340 cipher, I revised for a 3rd edition that came out a couple of years ago. So that's the details of the case. That's a retelling of the case. Some people have said that if you've read Hunted, you have a bachelor's degree on the Zodiac Serial Killer. You know the case, the ins and outs of it. My 2nd book that I published the following year is Profile, the Zodiac Examined. And that's when I took a deep dive into the details of the case. I looked at the existent forensic evidence in the case, and I looked at behavioral and psychological aspects of the case, did a lot of hypothesizing and saying, well, it could be this or could be that. I even looked at the different types of killers and the different types of serial killers in that book, and I concluded Profiled with about a 4-page profile of the killer. The remainder of the book is basically the explanation of how I achieved that profile based on the case facts. You can disagree and agree with the profile, but that's the profile I came up with, and I'm humble enough to know that most profiles are wrong, at least on certain points. So that's the profile that I came up with. My final book, Exposed, the Zodiac Revealed. In that book, I conclude the series by the research conclusions that I came to, that Theodore Kaczynski is responsible for the Zodiac Serial Killer murders. And I outline how I got to it, how it matched up with my profile in some ways and didn't match up with my profile in other ways. And I discuss some of the weaknesses of the case, why people have said, no, it couldn't possibly be Ted Kaczynski, why the police and why the FBI have lost interest in looking into Ted Kaczynski more fully, and just kind of tell the story of Ted Kaczynski and how he may have been the Zodiac, and how I concluded and why I concluded that he is the Zodiac serial killer.
All right, and Mark, thank you so much for that. So, you have written a book-length response on how you became familiar with the Zodiac case, obsessed, as you said, your relentless pursuit of the Zodiac Killer, and is there a particular avenue that you'd like to explore first? I mean, I would love to talk to you about your psychological profile from the book Profiled, because I was doing some of that stuff last week on Zodiac Monday. Or would you like to talk more about your suspect Kaczynski? Mark, you are the guest. I'm going to give you the choice.
Hey, let's do it all. Let's talk about Obsessed a little bit, my most recent book.
Okay,
Tells
sure.
the story of the different situations I got into. including one time I went to Lake Berryessa. This was in the year 2020. Lake Berryessa had been closed. The recreational area around it had been closed due to COVID. And the announcement was made that it's opened back up again. So I went there one day, and it's a place that I enjoy going to. I go there to think, to plan, to get away from it all, and then to enjoy solitude and you call it nature up there. On that particular day, I was afraid it was going to be kind of busy because, the opening up of Lake Berryessa after COVID, I was afraid it was going to be deluged with people. Turns out I was all by myself around the Zodiac site. And I did some journaling and I walked around the area. And then when I was there, a group of 6 people showed up to have a picnic. And they went and spread out a towel down by the shoreline and proceeded to have a picnic. And they kind of ignored me and I kind of ignored them. We said hi when we walked past each other, but that was about it. And while I was there, I all of a sudden heard some shouting. And I looked over toward the lake, and 2 of the members of that group had tried to swim across to an island in Lake Berryessa. And one of them had run out of steam and was shouting for help. The other one made it to the island and was yelling, "I can't help you. I'm exhausted. I'm gassed." So apparently they had been competing with one another to swim the fastest, and they both became exhausted at the experience. Well, the upshot of it all was the one who was left in the middle of the lake ended up drowning, and I was there when that happened. It's one of the strange experiences I have of being involved in the Zodiac case. This young man was about 300-400 feet away from the site of where Brian and Cecilia were stabbed at Lake Berryessa by the Zodiac. And here this man drowned. And quite startling.
Yes, that is very startling.
And I've met a lot of people through the Zodiac case. I became part of a group of people who regularly gather at the different crime scenes throughout the year. We meet on the 4 canonical Zodiac serial killing dates at the crime scenes. And we've also, some of us have gone down to Riverside. A bunch of us went down to Lompoc to explore the murder that happened down in that area that may have been a Zodiac case. And we get together outside of those times as well, and we discuss the case. So it's been a joy to me to be studying the Zodiac case and meeting a lot of very intelligent people and very provocative people. And we always seem to find something to talk about with respect to the Zodiac.
Yes, and I recall from reading your book, Obsessed, you wrote something about the gatherings by saying that no 2 Zodiac Killer gatherings are alike. Is that correct?
Oh, that's absolutely true, because some people come to some and some people come to others. We never know how many people are going to show up, who's going to be there. We've had people come for one event and then make a scene and declare something and refuse to discuss it and refuse to listen to anything anybody else has to say. It's like, well, why did you come? And no 2 of us have the same theories on the case. So there's a little bit of friction there, but we live and let live. And then sometimes people bring kids along. Other times people bring coworkers or friends along to check out the group. So I don't know that any 2 meetings or any 2 gatherings have had the same collection of people. And of course, we talk about our own lives and we share with one another what's going on with us, and we discuss the case and we discuss current events. And so it's just it's a fun gathering.
Yes, I would expect that there would be some difficulties in, like getting people to kind of communicate in a 2-way street. And believe it or not, one of the first Zodiac Killer videos that I ever watched once I went down the rabbit hole was the story of a Zodiac gathering at Lake Berryessa, where they pretty much said that people get around, they sit around, and they talk about the Zodiac. And I was like, huh, that looks pretty cool. And that was like in 2011, so I certainly couldn't have participated in discussions at that point, even though I thought I knew everything after 3 months of looking into the Zodiac, right? But this case takes a lot more than 3 months to explore. So I really would, though, kind of can see what you mean, because I would expect a lot of people think that they have solved the case, right? And they're just simply not going to listen to other competing theories. Do you get that vibe a lot?
No, not so much. Not among the people who come regularly. We give each other a wide latitude to share whatever we want to share our ideas, but please back it up with evidence. Don't just spout about what your current opinion is. And we're kind of good at that. We just we're respectful of one another. It's the people who aren't able to do that are the ones who don't feel comfortable to return to the group, or we let them know, this probably isn't a really good group for you. We're not really meshing with you as far as conversation. So, why bother returning? You're not listening to us. There's one guy showed up and said that the solution to the case is in the Z340. Not the symbols, but if you take the symbols out of focus, what the Z340 really is a photograph of the killer. And
sorry if I'm trying not to laugh, but please continue.
I know. We said, okay. You want to share a little bit more about that? And I think somebody said something like, well, but these are actual symbols, and he did write an earlier code that was solved as a code. What makes you think this is not another code, and what makes you think it's a book? Well, he didn't want any pushback whatsoever on his ideas, and some of us began to think that mental illness may have been involved in what he was doing and what he was thinking. So it's like, yeah, okay. And at some point we said, okay, well, thank you for sharing what you shared. And then we went to somebody else. But he didn't want that. He wanted to keep talking. We said, no, we gave you we gave you the floor. Now let's hear what somebody else has to say. And he got very upset, stood up and stormed out. So that's a person who obviously was not a useful contact and was not somebody who was either interested in learning or sharing on a serious level. So, that's an example of what's happened a few times.
All right, though, Mark, if we can kind of shift gears now, I would really like to talk to you about your observations in regards to the Zodiac Killer mystery, because you've proposed that Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was the Zodiac Killer, and I think he's a very different type of suspect, because I think he epitomizes what some people believe about the case, but not all. And by some, I mean, some people have this expectation and they have this belief that the Zodiac Killer was brilliant, extremely well educated, and had a high understanding of mathematics. And I'm going to get to some challenges to that later on, but let's kind of go through the elementary understandings of Ted Kaczynski, mostly from me. Let's see, Ted Kaczynski was born in 1942, right? So he would have been 27 years old during the bulk of Zodiac activity, 26 for Lake Herman Road, 27 for the following Zodiac crimes. He was an MA PhD from the University of Michigan, right, in mathematics, and he got his bachelor's degree from Harvard University. I don't know how much of an introduction the Unabomber needs, but Kaczynski would ultimately walk away from his academic life, from being Professor Ted or Dr. Ted, and he would ultimately go to live in a cabin outside of Lincoln, Montana, where he would write the famous Unabomber Manifesto, and he would also build bombs and send bombs. Once again, I think people get the gist of what the Unabomber was. He targeted universities and airports, right? That's why it's spelled like Unabomber, UNA, correct?
That's the FBI acronym for the case, yes.
I think that's the most elementary introduction that I can provide to the Unabomber story or Ted Kaczynski story as someone who is not an expert on Kaczynski. But I guess I would really like to know what you would think about some of the people who have different types of psychological profiles that would say that the Zodiac Killer was not somebody like Kaczynski. Ready?
Okay.
Just last week on Zodiac Monday, I was talking about the Consult podcast, which is one that is hosted by former FBI profilers. And one of their profilers said something that absolutely shocked me when he said he didn't see any educational signatures in the Zodiac's communication that would indicate that the Zodiac had anything more than a high school diploma. He didn't even think the Zodiac was university educated. And the reasons for this, you might be wondering. Number one, the misspellings. He thought the misspellings were accidental in the Zodiac's letters. When the Zodiac was writing the incorrect spelling, he thought the Zodiac did that all accidentally and was unaware of it. And the second is, the Zodiac isn't talking about anything that is so complicated that an excellent high school student couldn't have learned, like high school trigonometry and high school calculus and so on. But those are just some things there, but really I would love to know, as somebody who thinks that the Zodiac Killer was a PhD in mathematics, and Kaczynski had an IQ of 160, right?
167 he was measured, yes.
But who's counting? Right. No, of course, I'm joking. He had an IQ of 167, so obviously you disagree with the profiler from the Consult podcast. What is the evidence that the Zodiac Killer was extremely well educated and had a 160 plus IQ? And yes, 167, I'm committing that to memory. All yours, Mark.
Okay. You're blowing my mind with your lead up to that, because I'm looking at about 37 different threads that I want to follow on this. I'm not sure I'll have all of the time. It's very complex. Let me first say that Ted Kaczynski had the benefit of introducing himself to the world long before people actually knew who he was. So he spent 18 years setting and sending bombs through the mail, people wondering why he was doing what he was doing. People didn't even understand a motive till toward the end. And then in 1995, he released his manifesto, in which he said what he believed and explained why he was doing what he was doing. But there's some problems with that. But what basically has happened is people have read the manifesto, gotten to know the manifesto, accepted the manifesto, and then said, okay, I understand Ted Kaczynski. You're putting a lot of faith in the man to tell the truth about what he is doing and why he is doing it. For one, why did he spend 17 years in his bomb making and bomb sending before communicating with the public and telling them about his anti-technology views? If he had these anti-technology views, why did he not say something earlier? The excuse that he gave in the manifesto was that he had to kill people to get attention. People wouldn't take his ideas seriously. They wouldn't take a serious look at the documents until he had killed people. Well, people were very focused on the Unabomber for years prior to him releasing the manifesto. He didn't kill a single person and get attention for that and then produce his manifesto. He waited until he had 3 deaths. Furthermore, in breaking his silence and communicating with the FBI, he said he was getting weary of creating bombs, especially the trigger mechanisms. Creating detonators was a lot of work, and he was getting tired of it. So what he said in the manifesto and what he seemed to do in his real life seemed to be at odds with one another. To take a step back, we can say, well, what do we know behaviorally about the Zodiac serial killer? Well, one thing that we know is that he was very involved in deception. He laid things out a certain way. He let people believe something was happening, but then surprised them by showing, no, that's not what's taking place, and literally tricking people. So with Paul Stein's a cab driver. He assumes he's driving a patron to a location and he's going to get paid for the ride, and then they're going to say goodbye and never see each other ever again. Well, that's not what happened. It was a trick. What happened at Blue Rock Springs Park? The Zodiac pulled up behind Darlene and Michael and made them believe, with use of a spotlight or a flashlight or some type of light, that they were being approached by the police. So they got their driver's licenses ready and waited until the police officer came up, stood beside them in the car. Well, that's not what happened. It wasn't a police stop. They were gunned down. We don't know what happened at Lake Herman Road because nobody survived other than the Zodiac to tell the story of what happened. But if Sherry Jo Bates was a Zodiac victim and what the confession letter said was true, trickery was involved. She was led to believe that she had car problems and this person was going to help her. Again, that's if that was true and if that was the Zodiac. At Lake Berryessa, Brian and Cecilia were tricked into thinking that it was a simple robbery. Brian at the time even laughed, thinking, I got 75 cents to my name, you can have it. I'm going to get a sociology paper out of this experience. But that's not what was happening. The Zodiac had deceived them and ended up stabbing them with a very long knife. So what we know about the Zodiac was that he was not on the level. He was not honest with people. He seemed to use people's assumptions against them. Paul Stein had assumptions about what was going on. All the other victims assumed things that were going on and assumed them that they were not true, and the Zodiac used it against them. It seems precisely what Ted Kaczynski did later on. He was very astute at tricking people, making people think something was happening, things were a certain way. So let's talk about education level. One of the challenges of capturing Ted Kaczynski was the fact that nobody was certain what his education level was. Some thought he was a blue-collar mechanic because of the way he put his bombs together, by the way he discussed things in the letters to the police. Some people thought he had some college, but not a lot of college. Other people thought he was a college graduate. Some people thought he was a failed doctoral candidate. Nobody, or almost nobody that I know of, believed that the Unabomber was somebody in possession of a PhD. And Ted Kaczynski was very wily about that. He was very clever at disguising his intelligence. He even wrote in one of his letters, I'm paraphrasing here, but you think people with that don't have a college degree are not important. So people read that and said, oh, well, he doesn't have a college degree because he's criticizing people who do have college degrees, or criticizing how people are treated when they don't have a college degree. Meanwhile, here he is sitting with a PhD. He tricked his reading audience. He tricked the FBI. He tricked the police into believing that he was less educated than he was. So profiles were all over the board with his intelligence, with his level of education. And this was all done through choices that Kaczynski made and what he revealed about himself. My contention is the Zodiac did exactly the same thing. Why are there debates today about how intelligent the Zodiac was? Why do some people think he was a high school student or a grade school dropout because of his spelling and his messy handwriting, while other people say, no, he's a clever mastermind because he never got caught? Some people say the Zodiac is not intelligent enough to be the Unabomber because he wrote messy and he couldn't spell very well and he didn't display any overt intellectual capacity. And yet, who got caught? The Unabomber got caught. The Zodiac is still unidentified. One of the things I noticed about the Zodiac letters is that in the more material letter, the Zodiac used semicolons. He used them absolutely correctly in 3 locations, and in no other location in his writing, in that letter or other letters, would a semicolon be appropriate. So here's a man who knows enough how to use a semicolon, knows how to use it exactly correctly, and knows not to use it where it shouldn't be used. Well, what does it say about that? Are you going to say he's somewhat educated? Did he get lucky? I think it was John Douglas who said he presented himself as a what was the phrase? An educated illiterate. Basically, John Douglas was saying he's illiterate, but he's very highly educated.
All right, though. So, oh, sorry, Mark. I thought you were finished. Excuse me.
No, it's okay. I believe that the Zodiac wrote out a letter and then edited it and marked it up and dumbed it down and changed the vocabulary and fiddled around with the punctuation. And then on a third or fourth copy, then he wrote it out the way he had created it, making it look like he couldn't spell very well, making it look like he wasn't very educated, making it look like he didn't have fine motor skills and wrote very messily while being someone in possession of a PhD.
All right, though, so I would like to know, do you want a direct response to that about why do some people think the Zodiac was educated, and do you want like a response to why do people think the Zodiac was not educated?
Sure, I'll be happy to hear your point of view.
Okay, so from the educated standpoint, we have people like Garrett Penn, who wrote the book Time 17, which came out in 1987, and this starts with a conversation with his father, Hugh Penn. And yes, I'm telling the story of radians and inches along the radians. I mean, Mark, you know this better than anyone for the audience, where, you know, they talk about how the word radian would only be used in someone's vocabulary with perhaps 1% of the population. Only 1% of the population would use that in a flowing sentence as part of a letter when it's not necessarily part of a previously established discussion. And then Gareth Penn, of course, started lining up angles on the maps using the radian angle. And then he's like, wait a second, it looks like there are mathematical signatures here. That doesn't seem like something that's going to be planned by a high school graduate. This is somebody who has advanced education, and then the rest was history. And a lot of people have taken that and expanded upon it. Now, you haven't mentioned those exact points, but then the people who think that the Zodiac was uneducated do exactly what you just said and what I said a little bit about the Consult podcast, where they say that, you know, the misspellings and the sloppy handwriting and that he's not talking about overly complex things. Some things, though, he's saying are even involving like borderline incoherent or not incoherent, but delusional ideas. Like, I want to have slaves in paradise. And that's not necessarily something that an extremely educated person would convey because, once again, it's delusional. And I think that, now I guess I definitely lean toward the educated side. I don't think the Zodiac was only a high school graduate. All right, so do you want to just close the door on that subject?
Well, that's fine, whatever. I'm happy to trace whatever path you want to take.
Well, I mean, because I pretty much know that by rule, if your suspect is Kaczynski, you think that it's the former, that he's extremely educated. This is somebody who has an advanced understanding of mathematics. I mean, Ted Kaczynski might have a higher understanding of mathematics than any Zodiac Killer suspect. He was Harvard educated. He got a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. So, I mean, this is definitely one of the most intelligent Zodiac Killer suspects out there. But if we're going to shift the gears and then talk about something else, at what point...
Well, let me say one point here, Ned.
Go ahead.
Behaviorally, what Ted Kaczynski did as part of his disguise was pretend that he wasn't as intelligent as he was. And he pretended that he was a not-so-smart person, pretending to be a smart person. Okay, so he's, when he throws in big words, he uses them incorrectly. When he talks about somebody with a graduate degree, they're not as smart as they think they are, and yet he comes out with this manifesto that's carefully worded and succinct and shows a certain amount of intelligence. So Ted Kaczynski was pretending to be less intelligent, and in that capacity was pretending to be more intelligent than he was. Well, this is exactly what the Zodiac appears to have done. He used the word radians, but he used it incorrectly. he demonstrated that he didn't have a full understanding of the word, or maybe he didn't have a full understanding of the word. He used the word photoelectric, so people could rightly conclude that he had some certain intellectual capacity, maybe somebody who worked with his hands, maybe somebody who was able to build bombs or knew a little bit about electronics. So once again, with the Zodiac, behavioral similarity with Ted Kaczynski was he pretended he wasn't as smart as he was. And most people believe that there was a certain amount of dumbing down, that the spelling mistakes that he made were put in there on purpose, that he wrote messy, even though we know that he could write more clearly. For instance, in the Belli letter, he was very able to print very carefully when he wanted to. But for some reason, other letters, he was very messy. So that's a behavioral link between the two, pretending that you're not as smart as you are, and yet attempting to look like you're dumb, pretending to be smart.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Those are some strong similarities. But I wanted to ask you, at what point did you make the realization that Ted Kaczynski was your Zodiac Killer suspect? And you even talked about this in the book Obsessed, when you were saying that, you were not committed to a suspect during the early parts of your Zodiac research journey, but then you had the moment when you realized that Ted Kaczynski was the Zodiac. Would you like to tell the audience?
Sure. And it was a process. It was over time. The only way to do an investigation into something is to clear your mind of your biases as much as possible and acknowledge that you have some biases, whoever you are, whatever you're doing. When I originally looked at the case, I concluded that either it was Arthur Lee Allen, because I had read Gray Smith, and he makes a very good case for Gray Smith being, Arthur Lee Allen being responsible for being the Zodiac, or it was going to be somebody that I didn't know, but I would be able to understand a little bit on a psychological level. Once I got into the case, I'd kind of understand the person's personality and maybe mental makeup, even if I wouldn't identify who he was, or maybe he was lost to history. I was surprised to conclude after looking into the case that no, it wasn't Arthur Lee Allen. There's a lot of good reasons it wasn't Arthur Lee Allen, a lot of good reasons to stop looking at Arthur Lee Allen. And I was surprised to find that no, it wasn't somebody lost to history. It was a serial killer who was killing in other campaigns as well as the Zodiac. So my early time of looking in the case, I got together with a friend, and we spent hours and hours discussing the case, going through the letters line by line, going through the police reports, visiting the sites, talking to people, reading information online. We did this for the better part of a year. And it grew over time, and eventually I think we worked on it maybe 3 years altogether. And during that time, I began to suspect, wait a minute, Arthur Lee Allen doesn't sound like Arthur Lee Allen. There's reasons why Arthur Lee Allen, yes, he was a loud braggart and boastful, and he wanted to put himself in the center of the proceedings and wanted to get a lot of attention. But that's exactly not the type of person that the Zodiac revealed himself to be, whether it was in his phone calls, whether it was at Lake Berryessa, whether it was in his letters. He doesn't come across as a loud braggart type. He comes across as a person who is retiring in the shadows, doesn't want the limelight directly for himself, but he wrote letters saying that he wanted attention for himself and being a loud braggart, but that's not the type of person he revealed himself to be in person. So as I became familiar with the Zodiac letters and the cautiousness, the paranoia, the cleverness, the type of sense of humor he had, for me, it lined up with Ted Kaczynski. And the more I looked into it, the more early on, maybe a year or so after getting into it, I came in contact with the idea that Ted Kaczynski was the Zodiac. And the more I looked into it, the more things seemed to line up. In 2009, I corresponded with Ted Kaczynski. I sent him, I think, 6 or 7 letters over the course of 2 years, and he sent me, I think, 4 or 5 letters. And just over time, I saw more and more indications. So I don't know that there was a single point. Well, maybe there came a point when my friend and I said, yeah, this looks very much like Ted Kaczynski. And then we started to share with other people our conclusions just to see if we were making any sense and to kind of get some feedback on the case that we were putting together. It was in, I think it was 2013 that I approached the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. And I shared with them some of my ideas. It didn't go anywhere. The person that I talked to, the sergeant, what was he? The man I talked to was 6 months away from retirement, and he was not even excited about writing up reports. He showed me a pile of information he had on his desk of other people who had come and talked to him about the Zodiac and reports that he had to write on all of these other people. So I came to realize that his job was more about public relations and being nice to me, and he didn't know enough about the case to know whether what I was saying was accurate or useful, or whether I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was like a lot of other people who had come to the police department. He did say, though, that in discussions with the FBI that they had kind of concluded that Zodiac was an intelligent person. He was not unintelligent. And so that's one thing he said, that is the type of person that we're looking for. So that's kind of the progression. And then I didn't release Hunted until 2016. I kept coy about my full thoughts on the case until I released Exposed. And that's when I shared that I was convinced that Ted Kaczynski is the Zodiac.
Now, there's a book out there called The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Evander Oswell, and that book came out prior to your book Exposed, which talks about Ted Kaczynski as the Zodiac, and Oswell also looks at Ted Kaczynski and the Zodiac. How influential was Doug Oswell's book on you, your research, and your thinking?
Oh, very. It's an excellent book. In fact, Oswell was looking at Ted Kaczynski soon after his arrest as the Unabomber. I know he appeared on
Unsolved Mysteries?
Unsolved Mysteries, that's right. And I was an avid watcher of that show around that time. So I don't recall seeing it in the 1990s, but I'm certain that I did because I was watching that show regularly. So it was very influential. When I read his book, I realized it was a very good book. I thought the beginning was weak and the ending was weak, and that the major points that he made, the best points that he made, were parts of paragraphs. And my response to it was, well, if that's true, let's dig more into that. If that's true, then what more can we say about that? He was the one who noted that the name Zodiac, where does the term the Zodiac come from? And that was one of the things that I kind of filed into the back of my mind. Gee, we don't know why he calls himself the Zodiac. Nobody seems to know. There's a lot of theories. Maybe he's into astrology. Maybe he's into astronomy. Who knows? Every other serial killer, Jack the Ripper, West Side Strangler, the I-70 shooter, all these people, we know what the name means and where the name comes from. But apparently a few serial killers decide to devise their own name, like BTK or Son of Sam. We eventually learn where these self-given titles are explained. But with the Zodiac, we don't really know why he called that. Well, it was Doug Oswald who said that the Zodiac comes from the phrase, the Zodiac speaking. And if you rearrange the letters of the Zodiac speaking, you can get very close to Theodore Kaczynski, PhD. And I thought that was very, very interesting. It was one of those ITI moments. Isn't that interesting?
And that's just the
So
Zodiac speaking, just the 3 words?
the Zodiac speaking, yes.
Those 3
So
words. Okay.
in other words, the Zodiac was writing, "This is Theodore Kaczynski, PhD." And my friend and I, who were looking at the case, said, well, if that's true, what other rearranging of symbols and letters in the Zodiac letters are meaningful? Is he playing games with us? And we found a lot of instances, some more convincing than others, that yes, the Zodiac was playing a lot of word games and a lot of letter games in his letters. For instance, the confession letter, which I'm convinced is a Zodiac letter, it's entitled "The Confession." Well, on the 10th line, centered in that letter, is typed, "I did it." However, it's across 2 different sentences that are carefully placed, deliberately centered, and I can show that because prior to that lettering, all of the sentences end with all the sentences end with a period and 2 spaces. Following that example, every sentence ends with a period and a single space. Why the change? Well, it appears that the Zodiac was attempting to move letters and words around on the line to center things up. There are a number of examples like that in different letters where the Zodiac seems to be playing with the words that he's using and the placement on the page to communicate something, but not really communicate. Either he was encoding his own name and his own ideas within his letters, or he was looking for people smart enough to take a closer look at the letters, figure out who he was, and make contact with him. We don't really know what his motivation was. So that was, for me, another indication that Ted Kaczynski was responsible, and he was playing a game with the public and the police on more levels than people realized.
But I would really like to know what you meant a little bit more, and I'm sure it's been many, many years. But you said that the beginning of Doug Oswald's book was weak and the ending was weak. Do you remember exactly what observations that you made? Why do you think those sections were weak? What was that really lacking, which made you think you wanted to do more?
Well, the entire message of the book, or the theme of the book, is there are a lot of similarities between Ted Kaczynski and the Zodiac, and a lot of similarities between the Unabomber and the Zodiac. Well, I take it a step further and I say no. Ted Kaczynski is the Zodiac. I mean, you can read between the lines that Doug was saying that he wanted people to conclude that, and maybe for legal reasons he didn't want to say more. But as I say, there were a few good points in the book that were very well stated, very well recognized, but they needed to be dug into more. They needed to be clarified, and they needed to be taken to the logical conclusion. If that's true, then what else is true? Some of his work with numbers and looking into certain areas of what he was believing, an interesting theory, but it's really not backed up with any concrete evidence. So that's why I say it's interesting, but it's not really conclusive.
Now, do you believe that Ted Kaczynski murdered Sherry Jo Bates? I know you said you think the Zodiac wrote the confession, but do you believe that he murdered Sherry Jo Bates?
I do, but I'm not 100% on that. And that's because it's entirely possible that Ted Kaczynski was in Riverside, became aware of that murder, and then wrote letters and as a response to that. The danger in doing that, though, is if the murderer is identified, the person who wrote those letters ends up looking like an idiot. And here it is, almost 60 years later, and nothing has been shown to be not true with respect to the confession letter and with respect to this anonymous person claiming credit for the death. So I do believe he did, and I do believe he was down in that area, committed that murder, and followed it up less than a month later with the confession letters.
Now, have you heard that statement from Ken Maines on his channel Unsolved No More, when he said that, he has the DNA report on 2 Zodiac Killer suspects where the DNA was tested against what they had from the Sherry Jo Bates crime scene? One was Gary Francis Post, and the other was Ted Kaczynski, and both of them did not match the DNA that they had. But he didn't specify which items, because it's not all of them. In Sherry Jo Bates' case, we have the pants, we have the watch, and we have the hair that's on her hand. He didn't specify exactly which ones, but have you heard that before?
I did not hear that specifically from Ken Maines. I've listened to some of his work in the past. It's my understanding that the hairs on Sherry Jo Bates' hand only revealed a mitochondrial DNA, which is much less accurate, much less identifiable with respect to a suspect. In other words, you can use that to eliminate somebody, but you can't say that even if they match, it's not the same, not necessarily the same person. From my understanding, mitochondrial DNA is handed down to us from our mother, so we and our mothers each have the same mitochondrial DNA, and it can change over time, but very slowly, so that there are breaks along the generations, but there are a limited number of different mitochondrial DNAs, and that it doesn't necessarily link somebody to the other. I'm not aware that the police department even has possession of Ted Kaczynski's DNA. And the reason I say that is because in 2011, the FBI requested a sample of Ted's DNA so that they could compare it to DNA that they believed they had gathered in the Chicago Tylenol murder case. Ted Kaczynski was being investigated for his responsibility, his potential responsibility in that case. And Ted's response to that was, I will give you my DNA, but only if you give me all of my books and papers back, because I will need those to go to trial in the Chicago Tylenol murder case. Well, if you're accused of something and you're being investigated for something, your first response shouldn't be, gee, I guess I'm going to trial on this and I need to gather up all the information I can to go to trial. Makes me think that he was more involved in that case than he's been letting on across the years.
Oh, really?
But with respect, so why was the FBI requesting his DNA in 2011 if they already had it? Kaczynski was arrested and convicted prior to a time when it was the law to take DNA from prisoners, from those who are arrested or convicted. The laws have changed over the years, and now anybody who goes into federal prison is going to be tested for DNA, but there's no indication that Ted's DNA has been taken.
All right, well, Mark, and thank you for that there. But you did say, though, that Ted Kaczynski was either a habitual liar or someone who deceived people. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, making some noise over here.
Yes, everything all right?
Yeah, go ahead. My apologies.
So you did say that Ted Kaczynski was either a habitual liar or he was deceptive, and he was intentionally deceptive. Do you think that thing about the Tylenol murders and I need my books for the trial would be a possible instance of deception, trolling, lying for attention, and just somebody who is doing this because he can get away with it, which is consistent with psychopathic behavior? So what do you think?
Could be, yeah. I wouldn't put it past him. My understanding of Kaczynski was he was very, very intelligent and seemed to get off on deceiving other people. And he could do it extremely subtly, almost as though he knew what profilers are looking for, and so he would mess with dropping in hints of things that simply weren't true. when a profiler would see it, they'd get all excited and say, see this proves this. One of the mistakes they made in the Unabomber case was that the profiles who were working the case early on, and they were not what I would call trained and established profilers, but the work that they did, they said, well, this is the profile we've made. Well, more bombings happened and more letters arrived. And the members of the Unabomber task force said, well, why don't you revise the profile based on all of this new information we're getting? And the profilers refused to. They said, no, the profile is the profile. This is the type of person that we're looking for. Well, they were looking for the wrong person because Kaczynski was so clever that he dropped in so many hints that led people astray. And I believe that's part of the reason that the Zodiac was never caught, is because the perpetrator was so clever to make insinuations, lead people the wrong direction, and people gathered it up like they were finding breadcrumbs in the letters and saying, oh, look what I figured out about this guy. Look what I figured out, without realizing that these were items that were deliberately placed in the letters. These were clues. And the Zodiac himself said so, leaving fake clues for the police to find, to run all over town. I think a lot of people looking at the Zodiac case have been running after fake clues that the Zodiac has placed in his letters and in his activities.
Now, Mark, you and I have had the opportunity to correspond over the years, and I'm going to share something with you that you had told me previously, as well as I can, and I want you to let me know if you still stand by it, because I asked you once, do you think that Ted Kaczynski was the type of person who was just born to kill, or do you think that he was a smart guy who was a good person who just slowly fell off the rails and then went down the hill, and it's a snowball effect into terrible behavior? And what you said to me was, I don't think it's either one. You said you thought that Ted Kaczynski decided from an early age that he wanted to be a killer, and that he mostly just had the plan to kill, whether it's the Zodiac persona or the Unabomber persona, maybe activities on Riverside, and that he decided that he was going to commit murders, and it's just destruction. Do you stand by that?
I'd probably be a lot more nuanced in my wording today. As I have been coming to know Kaczynski and taking a deep dive into his life and his writings and his activities, there's so much deception going on that sometimes it's hard to know precisely what's true and what's not true, based on what he said, based on what his other family members said. I believe that the current understanding of serial killers is that they have a propensity to kill, but at some point their environment pushes them a certain direction, and then their own cognition, their own free will, their choice, they decide to act upon it. I think somebody said that genetics is the gun, environment is the bullet, and a person's decision pulls the trigger. That all of those three have to be in line for somebody to become a killer, or in particular a serial killer. I think that's a good way of looking at it.
I do too.
It's the age-old question of nature or nurture. Is somebody born? And I know that conscience resides in the brain, is at the hippocampus, or whatever part of the brain that is. Some people are actually born with a deformation, and that biologically they don't have a conscience. They look at somebody falling down the stairs as being no different than a chair falling down the stairs. They don't have that normal human reaction to seeing somebody else in pain and realizing that could have been them in pain and have a certain level of care. There are other people who get that part of the brain damaged through childhood abuse or neglect or whatever, and they grow up being sociopathic or psychopathic based on brain damage. So it's hard to say exactly what all takes place. I believe it's an area that needs more incredible examination to fully understand what guides human behavior, what guides human decisions, why people do horrible things, why some people, grow up in abusive situations and they turn out okay. They turn out to be fabulously successful. Other people grow up in different types of abuse that may even seem like mild abuse, and they become serial killers. What all plays a part in that? I think it's far more complex than we sometimes want to believe.
Oh, I absolutely do agree with the complexities. But I have one final question for you, Mark, and this relates to the time frames. We have the Zodiac Killer operating in 1968 and 69, and the Zodiac letters start in 69. Then they go to roughly 1971, depending on what theory you choose to believe. We have the Holton Zodiac activity for 72, 73. The Zodiac starts sending letters again in 74, but the Unabomber doesn't start operating until 1978, correct?
That's correct, yes.
What was Ted Kaczynski doing during that time gap? How does your theory explain the time frame and that Holton Zodiac Unabomber activity?
I think the better question to ask is, what was Ted Kaczynski doing between 1966 and 1978? In 1966, he self-reported that he had a psychological and philosophic breakdown where he made the decision that he could kill anybody that he wanted to. He could do whatever he wanted to and not worry about the consequences and not care about what other people suffered or whatever took place. He toyed with the idea at that time of being a spree killer, going out and killing a bunch of people and then taking his own life, but made the decision at that time that no, he was going to kill people and then make at least some effort to not get caught. That's what happened to him, and that was involved with, I believe, an outbreak in schizophrenia, and that made it impossible for him to be a successful professor, in which case he quit after being a professor for 2 years and went to live out in the wilds, and did not become the Unabomber until 1978. What was happening to Kaczynski between those two eras? Particularly after he left UC Berkeley, there was a 2-year gap in his life where not a whole lot is known about where he was or what he was doing. He gave his parents' address in Lombard, Illinois as where he lived, but he did not remain in Lombard for those 2 years. He did have a job one of those winters, and he talks about spending winters with his family. Where was he when it wasn't wintertime? It's not really clear. Those 2 years are the exact same years where the bulk of the Zodiac serial killing activity took place. The first murder happened while Ted Kaczynski was on break as a professor at UC Berkeley. The second murder happened 4 days after the last day of his employment at UC Berkeley. The following 2 murders happened not during the wintertime, at Lake Berryessa, and then in Presidio Heights, in San Francisco. Where Kaczynski was, what he was doing is not really clear. And then during that 2-year period, the bulk of the Zodiac letters were written. 1971, you gave that date as the final letter. It doesn't include the Exorcist letter, of course, but in 1971, in June of that year, he moved to Montana. And for some reason, the Zodiac letters ended with only one conclusive Zodiac letter happening after that, and that's the 1974 Exorcist letter. So what was Kaczynski doing during that time? Seems like he was being the Zodiac.
Yes, but in 74 to 78, is he just living in the cabin in Montana?
He moved in 71, so 71 to 96 is when he lived in his cabin in Montana. 71, he moved there, Zodiac letters stopped, and he was spending a lot of time building his cabin, moving into his cabin, becoming familiar with the area. He spent countless hours hiking, getting to know his new region, and this is in the mountains of Montana. His neighbors were absolutely astonished at how much hiking he did and how far he went and how well he got to know the area. But it seems like in 1974, for some reason, he returned to either sign off on the Zodiac campaign or send one more letter or maybe send a couple of letters. And that's the last we heard of him. During that period, his rage was building, and he made the decision to become the Unabomber. And it wasn't until 78 that he set his first bomb, but of course it takes a while to make a bomb and make plans to set that bomb and to make all those preparations. So I don't think that gap is out of the ordinary. Transitioning from one serial killing campaign to another serial killing campaign is quite rare.
But you know who possibly did that?
What's that?
A good example of someone who possibly did that could even be the Zodiac. Now, I don't know where you stand on the Count Marco letter, but it sounds like you're kind of leaning toward the Count Marco letter not being authentic. But once, we have the Exorcist letter in 74, right, that does not say this is the Zodiac speaking, but it has Zodiac language, misspellings, and the Zodiac signatures at the end, more or less, like similar things that he used. Then we have the other two letters, and then we have the Count Marco letter in 74. And at that point, if that is the same person, he's calling himself the Red Phantom. He's changed his identity or his name, Red Phantom, Red with Rage. So really, he's calling himself the Phantom. But, so it's quite possible the Zodiac was a serial killer who changed his name. But do you think the Count Marco letter is authentic?
I don't know. It could be, it could not be. I mean, it's authentic. Somebody wrote it. I don't know that it's a Zodiac letter.
I should have said authentically Zodiac.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Interestingly, though, Ted Kaczynski, in writing letters to his parents, often signed off with a different pseudonym. And it's not clear whether he was being funny or trying to make a statement or what he was doing, but he used 3 or 4 different fictional or real-life names that he signed him as himself. Wow. So it wouldn't be out of character for him to call himself the Red Phantom.
And all right, Mark, thank you so much for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday. And right now I would like to give you the floor and just ask, do you have any final send-off for the listeners? Where can people get your books? Anything new that you're working on? And you can have the concluding message. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Ned, and thank you for having me on today. I always enjoy being interviewed by you. You ask provocative questions, and you push back on your guests, and I appreciate that, and I admire that. My books are available at any bookstore. They can order them for you, or through Amazon online, or through my publisher's website, geniusbooks.com. The Zodiac Serial Killer series, Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed, are very in-depth and carefully and conscientiously tells my story of being a Zodiac enthusiast and some of the interesting events that happened and experiences that I went through as being a Zodiac investigator. And I'm also open to receiving texts or phone calls. You can check out my website, drhewitt.com, and contact me through that, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that Ted, I really appreciate it.
Mark Hewitt, thank you so much.